Welcome back to This is Thailand, where we tell the stories that don't make it into the retirement brochures. Today's story belongs to Murray Kalinowski, 52 years old from Fort McMurray, Alberta, 26 years working oil rigs in northern Canada, and 2 contract stints out in the North Atlantic. A big, quiet man with wrecked hands and a laugh that always seems to arrive a second late. The kind of man who spent his whole working life around machinery that will kill you if you're careless, and who learned somewhere in all that to trust the man standing next to him without ever once asking a question. That habit cost him something back in Canada. He'll tell you about that himself in a minute. What we want you to hold on to is an image, a 52-year-old Canadian standing on the front step of a house he paid for, in a village in Izan at dusk on Songkran. There's a new lock on the door. His key doesn't turn it. And there are 3 black garbage bags sitting on the step with all his clothes stuffed inside them. Now, most of you can guess where you think this goes. We'd bet money you're wrong, because what Murray did over the 11 days that followed was not what his wife expected, and we don't think it's what you're expecting either. This one's going to stick with you. Here's his story in his own words. Okay, so, my name's Murray Kalinowski, and yeah, before you ask, it's Polish. My grandfather came over to Manitoba in 1948, and nobody in my family has spoken a word of it since. I worked the patch. 26 years. Started as a lease hand at 19, got bumped up to derrick hand about 3 years in, and I was a driller for the back half of it. Mostly northern Alberta, out past Fort Mac, camp work, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 12-hour shifts and half of them in the dark. Did 2 contracts offshore Newfoundland as well, which I'd recommend to nobody. The North Atlantic is not a body of water that likes people. If you've never been on a rig, I don't really know how to explain the culture of it, but I'll try because it matters to everything that comes after. You don't complain. That's rule 1. It's minus 41 with the wind, and your hands have stopped working, and you don't say anything about it because everybody's hands have stopped working. You don't complain. You just do the next thing. Rule 2 is you don't ask twice. Somebody tells you the pipe's secured, the pipe's secured. You don't go check behind him. You don't say, hey, are you sure? Because that's an insult. That's you telling a man in front of the whole crew that his word's no good. And rule 3, which is really just rules 1 and 2 put together, you trust the guy on the other end of the chain. Absolutely, completely, no reservations. That's the only way that work gets done without somebody ending up in a helicopter. 26 years of that. 26 years of trusting men absolutely because the alternative was worse. You can probably see the problem coming. 2019, guy named Kevin. Worked with him off and on since about 2004. Good hand, a funny bastard. We'd been to each other's weddings. He'd got out of the field and into a private oil services outfit, some kind of downhole tooling thing. I never fully understood the business, and I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. I never fully understood the business. He phoned me on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I was in the truck outside the superstore in Fort Mac waiting for my wife, ex-wife now, to come out with the groceries, and I had the heater on, and I was eating a bag of those cheap ketchup chips, the store brand ones. Weird what you remember. He said, Murray, this is guaranteed. He said, it's basically printing money. He said, I'm not phoning everybody, I'm phoning you. And I said, yeah, no, for sure. I rolled my RRSP into it. The whole thing. Then when I got my severance the following spring, I rolled that in too, because by then the first quarterly report had come back looking good. And I thought, well, if it's good, it's good. Why would I only half do it? 14 months? That's how long it took. Second downturn hit, the contracts they were counting on evaporated. And there was some other stuff in there too. Some stuff about how the money had been used that I only found out later and honestly still don't have the full picture on. Doesn't matter much. Gone is gone. Kevin stopped answering the phone in about the March. I left him 4 voicemails. I've never left 4 voicemails in my life for anybody. 26 years. Frozen fingers, Christmases in camp. Missed my daughter's graduation because we were mid-hole and you don't leave mid-hole. All of it into a hole in the ground, and not even one of the ones I drilled. And here's the part 1,000 actually ashamed of. I never told anybody, not my ex. We were done by then anyway, but she'd have wanted to know. She'd have had a right to know. Not my brother Wade down in Lethbridge, who's an accountant, who I could have phoned before I signed anything, and who would have asked me 11 questions I couldn't have answered. Not the boys at the Legion, not one single human being. Because how do you say it? 50-year-old man, spent his whole life around dangerous equipment, prides himself on not being stupid, and he handed over his entire retirement on a phone call because a guy he likes said, "Trust me." You don't say it. You just carry it around and you get quieter. So I kept working. Went back out as a hand, which at 48 is a bit of a come down, but nobody said anything. And I did another 3 years until my hands got to the point where they don't close all the way anymore. Look, well, you can't see it, but they don't close. Something about the tendons. The doctor had a word for it. I stopped listening partway through. Then Mom died. That was in Lethbridge, about a year and a half ago now. She was 84, and it was quick, which is the mercy you're supposed to be grateful for, and I suppose I am. Wade and I cleared the house out over a weekend. 40-some years of stuff. She'd kept every card I ever sent her, including ones I don't remember sending, including one from a girlfriend I'd completely forgotten I had. House sold in the spring. After everything, after Wade's half and the lawyers and the taxes, my share came to $118,000. $118,000. I want to tell you what that was like, and I don't think I can. I'd go on the banking app, and I'd look at the balance, and I'd close it again. Do that 4 or 5 times a day. It didn't feel like money. It felt like something I was holding for somebody, like it was still hers, which of course it was. Right up until it wasn't. Wade phoned me in the summer and asked what I was going to do with it. Straight out. "What's the plan, Mur?" And I said I was going to leave it alone for a while and just let it sit. That was a lie. I'd already been looking at flights. 2 guys off my last crew, Deke and a fellow we all called Turtle, they'd both retired to a place called Yom Tien in Thailand, and they were posting pictures on Facebook. Prawns the size of your thumb. $11 for a whole meal on the beach. Turtle in a tank top looking about 9 years younger than the last time I saw him. That was the research. That was the entire research process. I want to be clear about that. 2 Facebook accounts. And you have to understand what February is in Fort McMurray. It's not weather, it's a personality. It's a thing with opinions about you. You go out at 7 in the morning and plug your truck in and stand there in the dark listening to the block heater, and you think, this is it. This is the whole arrangement. This is what's left. I was 52, no wife, daughter in Kelowna who I talked to at Christmas, hands that don't close. $118,000 that felt like it belonged to a dead woman. And one very clear thought sitting on top of everything else. I can't do another February here. That was it. That was the whole decision. People always want there to be more to it, and there isn't. I booked the flight on a Sunday night in October, sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop and a glass of Crown Royal, and I didn't tell Wade about that either until I was already gone. So I landed in Bangkok at 11 at night in October, and I want to tell you about the first thing I felt, because it wasn't the smell or the noise or any of that. It was my hands. You walk out of the terminal at Suvarnabhumi, and the air hits you like somebody opened an oven, and about 40 seconds after that, my hands started to unclench. Not all the way, but more than they had in about 4 years. I stood on the curb with my bag between my feet, and I opened and closed my fists like an idiot, over and over, and a taxi guy kept asking me where I was going, and I couldn't answer him because I was busy. That's it. That's the whole reason. You can have all the philosophy about starting over you want. I moved to the other side of the planet because it was warm and my hands worked. Deke picked me up in Pattaya the next afternoon. Deke's real name is Derek, and nobody has called him that since about 1998. He got me a room at a place off Thaprea Road, near enough to Jom Tien Beach that you could walk it. 7,000 baht a month, which is about 270 Canadian, for a whole month. I paid 3 months up front just because I couldn't believe it, and I wanted to see if they'd say no. The first 6 weeks were good. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Best 6 weeks I'd had in a decade. Easy. We'd go down to the seafood places at the far end of Jom Tien Beach Road in the evening, the ones with the plastic chairs right on the sand, and you'd get a whole grilled snapper and som tam and a couple of big Chang towers, and it had come to maybe 600 baht between the two of us. 23 bucks. Turtle would come along most nights, and Turtle, by the way, had lost about 40 pounds and looked 10 years younger, exactly like the photos, which I'd assumed was a filter or good lighting or whatever. It wasn't. The man had just stopped being cold and stopped eating camp food. Bought buses going up and down Beach Road with the horns and the exhaust. Motorbikes everywhere, whole families on them. Kids standing up on the footboard in front of Dad. The smell of grilled pork on sticks. Mooping, I learned that word about day 3, mixed with drains and incense and two-stroke. Roosters at 5 in the morning, even in the middle of a city, which nobody warns you about. Monks walking the Soai at dawn with the alms bowls, and I'd be coming back from the 7-Eleven with a toasted ham and cheese, and I'd have this feeling like I'd wandered onto a film set. I ate a lot of toasted sandwiches from 7-Eleven. Still do. Say what you want, they're good. And then somewhere around week 5, 6, something started to go a bit sour on me, and it took me a while to work out what it was. It was the talking. See, we'd sit in these beer bars off Soi Buakau, not go-go places, just open front bars with a pool table and a couple of girls playing Connect 4 and Rod Stewart on the speakers. And there'd always be 4 or 5 guys my age or older. Aussies, Brits, a German fella, a couple of Yanks. And every single one of them had a story, and every single one of them had told it about 400 times. The ex-wife took the house, the ex-wife took the kids, the Thai girlfriend took 40 grand and ran off with a Thai boyfriend. Never trust them, mate. They're all the same. All of them. And they'd say it with this weird satisfaction. Like being ripped off was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to them, and they'd built a little house on top of it and moved in. There was one guy, a Scottish fella, must have been 70, who told me the same story about a bar he'd bought in 2011 on 2 different nights in the same week, word for word, including the pause before the punchline. Same pause. And I sat there nodding both times because you don't embarrass a man. And I went back to my room after and I thought, that's you. That's you in 6 years. Sitting on a plastic stool telling a stranger about Kevin and the RRSP with the exact same pause in it. Because I hadn't told anybody about Kevin. Not Wade, not the Legion, nobody. But down there I could feel it wanting to come out. Every night it got a bit closer to the surface. And the only thing stopping me was knowing that once you tell that story in a beer bar, you become a guy who tells that story in a beer bar. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be bitter about a place I'd been in for 6 weeks. So I left. Not dramatically. I just told Deke I wanted to see some of the country, and he said, suit yourself, and that was the end of it. Deke's not a sentimental man. A guy at the bar, not the Scottish one, a different fella, quiet, drove a song Theu. He'd told me the Northeast was cheaper and greener in the rainy season, and that the girls up there were, and I quote, less educated in the ways of the Farang, which is a horrible thing to say, and I laughed at it at the time, so put that on my tab as well. But cheaper I understood. I took the overnight bus up to Udon Thani. 12 hours, freezing air conditioning, a movie playing at full volume that nobody watched. And Udon's not a tourist town. That's the thing you notice immediately. There's a lake in the middle of it, Nong Project, where people jog and do aerobics in the evening in these big groups with a lady on a stage and terrible dance music. There's a night market. There's a central mall with a Swenson's in it. There are maybe 8 Farangs in the whole city on any given Tuesday, and about 6 of them are married to somebody's daughter. I rented a townhouse in a little Mubon on the Ring Road. 8,000 baht a month, about 310 Canadian. 2 floors, an aircon unit in the bedroom that sounded like a helicopter, a spirit house out front with a red Fanta on it that the landlady kept topped up. And I needed a vehicle, obviously. Nowhere to walk to. Now understand, I have been around machinery my entire adult life. I know equipment. I know when something's been abused. This is the one thing on this earth I would have told you I could not be fooled about. I went to a Toyota dealership out on the Mitterfap Road, one of the big proper ones with the flags, because I figured a dealer's safer than a guy in a lot. And they had a Vigo out back on the used line, a 2016 silver 4-door, and I'd already decided on it before I'd finished walking across the forecourt. It had a bull bar, I liked the bull bar. That's the level of thinking we're operating at here. Salesman was maybe 25, spoke about 11 words of English, very keen. Fine. We sorted the price, 195,000 baht, call it 7.5 grand Canadian, and he walked me over to the finance desk to do the paperwork even though I was paying cash. And there was a woman sitting there, 41, though I didn't know that yet. Little gold-rimmed glasses, company polo shirt, one of those maroon ones with the logo on the pocket. She had a stack of files squared up on her left and a calculator and one of those clip-on desk fans pointed at her face. And she was on the phone in Thai, and she held up one finger at us without looking up. That's how I met my wife, waiting while she finished a phone call about somebody else's loan application. She got off the phone, apologized, and asked to see the paperwork on the Vigo. That's not what a finance person does, by the way. A finance person takes your money. She looked at the sales sheet, and then she asked the salesman something in Thai, and he answered, and she asked it again in a different way, and he stopped smiling. Then she said to me, in this very careful English, with the pauses in the wrong places, like she was placing each word down on a table, "Sir, this truck, the meter is not correct. The service book and the meter, they are not the same story." I said, "What do you mean?" She turned the file around and showed me. Service stamps from a place in Nong Khai, mileage at each visit, and the numbers didn't run in the right direction across the last two entries. Somebody had wound it back. And she wasn't even angry about it. She was just embarrassed, the way you'd be if a relative said something rude at dinner. Now here's the thing that got me. I went out and looked at it myself. Pedal rubbers were worn through. Driver's seat bolster was gone. Steering wheel was polished, shiny on the top left where a thumb sits. Every single one of those things I would have caught in about 9 seconds on a piece of equipment at work, and I hadn't caught any of them because I'd seen a bull bar and gone soft in the head. She'd cost her own dealership a sale, cost herself whatever her cut was, to stop a fat Canadian she'd never met from buying a truck with a woundback odometer. Nobody had done anything like that for me since. I don't know, since ever, maybe. Since Kevin was still answering his phone. I bought a different one off them 2 weeks later, a 2018 Fortuner, higher mileage but honest, 410,000 baht, about 16,000 Canadian, paid cash. And when the paperwork was done, I asked her if she'd have dinner with me. She said no, politely, something about it not being appropriate with customers. I came back the following month about the aircon in the truck, which did not need looking at, and I asked her again. She said no again, and she looked genuinely sorry about it, which somehow made it worse. Third time was about 7 weeks later, and it wasn't even at the dealership. It was at the Tesco Lotus out on the ring road, both of us in the fruit section on a Saturday morning. And she laughed at me because I was holding a rambutan like it was a live grenade. And that time she said yes. She picked the restaurant. Little Isan place near Nong Project Lake. Plastic tablecloths, one wall open to the street, some tam pounded in front of you so loud you have to lean in to talk. And she paid for her own. I tried. She wouldn't have it. Put the money on the table and slid it over and gave me a look I'd come to know very well over the next 3 years. Ploy, 41. That's her nickname. Everyone here goes by a nickname. Her real name's got about 9 syllables in it, and I still can't say it right, and she still thinks that's funny. Divorced. 10 years by then. Thai ex-husband from Khon Kaen, gone to Bangkok, and not much interested in either of them, since one son, Bank, 20, studying engineering at the university in Khon Kaen. She had a job. I want to keep saying that because it was doing a lot of work in my head at the time. She had a job with a salary, about 22,000 baht a month, call it 850 Canadian, which up there is a proper job with an air-conditioned office and a company polo shirt. She had her own car, a little Almera she was still paying off. She had a condo in town she rented and she paid the rent herself. And she never asked me for anything. Not once. Not a phone, not a motorbike, not 100 baht for petrol. 6 months of this. I'd offer to pay for things, and half the time she'd let me and half the time she wouldn't, on no system I could ever work out. The tuition thing was in about the March. Bank's semester fees came up, and she mentioned it the way you'd mention the weather, just as a thing that was happening, And I said, well, look, let me get that. It's nothing. And her face changed. I've thought about that face a lot since. She went very still and very polite, which I learned later is what she does instead of shouting. And she said something like, he is my son. I will pay for my son. And then she talked about something else for about 10 minutes and would not come back to it. I apologized twice that night. She accepted the apology in a way that made it clear I still didn't understand what I'd done wrong. And I didn't. Genuinely didn't. I thought I'd been generous. What I'd actually done was tell a woman with a job and a car and a son at engineering school that I thought she was the kind of woman who needed a farang to pay her bills. Should have asked more about that, what it cost her to be seen that way, in a town that small going out with me. Didn't. In May, she said her parents wanted to meet me. I hadn't asked. I want that on the record. I hadn't brought it up, hadn't hinted. She brought it, and she brought it in a slightly grim way, like a thing that had to be got through. Bandung's about an hour and a half northeast of Udon, out past the salt flats. Flat country, rice paddies, water buffalo standing in the wet, spirit houses in front of every second building with a red Fanta and a stick of incense on them. Dogs asleep in the middle of the road that do not move for vehicles. Her parents' place was a wooden house up on concrete pillars with a tin roof and a concrete pad underneath, where everybody actually lives. Chickens going through a big clay water jar and a picture of the old king on the wall. Her mother fed me for about 4 hours. Larb, sticky rice, some tam so hot it took the roof off my mouth, and everyone watching to see if I'd cry. I did a bit. They were delighted. Her father was a retired school teacher, taught in that district for 34 years. Small man, very upright, reading glasses, and he sat me down after the food with a pot of tea and asked me questions for the better part of an hour, through ploy, without one single smile. What was my work in Canada? How long? Why did I stop? Did I have children? And where? And what would they think? Did I have money and where did it come from? Was I married before? And what happened? And whose fault was it? And then the one that shut me up completely? He asked if Murray stays in Thailand and Murray dies, what happens to Ploy? I said I didn't know, which was the truest thing I said all day. He nodded like that was an acceptable answer. Not a good one. Acceptable. We drove back to Udon in the dark, headlights full of moths, and I sat there with my ears still burning from the somtam thinking, this is not the story. This is not the story they tell in those bars on Soibuahau. There's no bar. There's no sick buffalo. There's no hospital bill for a mother who turns out to be perfectly healthy. There's a woman with a pay slip and a father who just interrogated me like I was applying for a mortgage. I'd found the exception. That's what I decided. That exact night, in the truck, on that road. And once you decide you found the exception, you stop looking at anything, because what would you be looking for? I did start spending a bit after that. Nothing big. Fuel, food, a decent fridge for her parents because theirs iced up solid every 3 days. 9,000 baht, $350. A new water pump, bags of cement for a wall her father was building himself at 73 because nobody could talk him out of it. Under 30,000 baht all in, over about 7 months. 1,200 Canadian, spread across half a year. And I want to be honest with you about what that felt like, because it's the whole engine of everything that comes after. It felt fantastic. Not because I was buying anybody, because for the first time since 2019, I could put my hand on something and fix it. 26 years, I was a man who fixed things, and then I was a man sitting in a truck in a superstore parking lot with a bag of chips and no retirement. And now here I was buying a fridge, and a woman's mother was patting my arm and calling me by name. You want to know how I lost $111,000? That's how. It started with a fridge and it felt like medicine. I asked her to marry me in the November, at the lake, badly, having not planned a word of it. She said yes and then immediately said, we have to ask my father. Her father took 11 days to answer. Nobody told me that was happening. I found out afterward. He went and talked to her mother and to an uncle in Sakan Nakhon, and to the abbot at the Wat in the village, and to Bank down in Konkain. And only when all of that was done did Ploy get a phone call telling her yes. I'd been sat in my townhouse for a week and a half thinking she'd gone off the idea. The sin-sod conversation happened at the house in Bandung, on the concrete pad underneath, in the afternoon heat with the chickens going through, and a fan pointed at nobody in particular. Her father did the talking. Ploy translated, and I could tell she was softening some of it because she kept looking at the floor. He said 300,000 baht. That's 12,000 Canadian, near enough. And I want you to understand that I'd been braced for a lot worse because you hear numbers in those Pattaya bars. 1 million, 2 million, some poor bastard who paid 800,000 for a girl who left him in 9 months. 300 was low. Low enough that I said out loud, "Are you sure?" which Ploy did not translate and which I'm told was rude anyway. And then her father explained it, and this is the part that mattered. He said the sin sod is not for the family, it's for the village. It's so that when people talk about his daughter, and they will talk, a 41-year-old divorced woman marrying a Farang, they will absolutely talk. There's a number attached that says she was valued properly. It's about face. His face. Her face. The family's standing on that road. He said if it's too low, people say the Farang got her cheap. If it's too high, people say the family sold her. 300,000 was the number that made both of those sentences impossible. I sat there on a plastic stool with sweat running down my back thinking, that's the most sensible thing anybody has explained to me in about 4 years. The wedding was in the February. Morning ceremony at the house. 9 monks chanting, starting before it was properly light. That low humming sound that gets into your chest. White string wound around everybody's wrists. My knees have never recovered from that much sitting on a floor. Half the village came, and about 40 of them wanted a photograph with me, and I stood there in a cream tie shirt about 2 sizes too tight, sweating like a racehorse and grinning like an idiot. Then the money. They lay it out on a tray, 300,000 baht in banknotes, plus some gold. 5 baht weight of gold chain, which is another 60-odd thousand baht, call it $2,400. And it's counted, out loud, in front of everyone. Her aunties leaning in, the neighbors, kids climbing on the rail to see. It takes a while, and there's a lot of commentary. And when it was done and everyone had seen it and the tray had been carried inside, her father took the whole lot and gave it back to us. Every baht said something to Ploy that she translated as, "This is for your house. You two will need it more than we do." I got a bit emotional at that, which I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Big man in a tight shirt, wet eyes, in front of 100 Thai people. But here's what actually happened in my head at that moment, and this is the load-bearing beam of the whole thing. So listen, I thought, proof, not evidence. Not a good sign. Proof. Case closed. Question answered. Done. These people are not what the internet says. My judgment, which had been in the shop since 2019, was working again. I'd assessed a situation correctly for the first time in years, and I could stop. And I did stop. That's the honest truth of it. From that day forward, I did not check one single thing, not one. Everything after that, every decision I made for the next 2.5 years, was made by a man who had already decided he was safe. We registered at the M4 in Udon about 3 weeks later. Took an hour and a half, most of it waiting. 2 witnesses, an interpreter, a photocopy of my passport, a clerk with a rubber stamp and a fan on her desk. Cost about 500 baht, an hour and a half to legally bind myself to another human being in a foreign country. And I want to point out that it was the easiest piece of paperwork I did in the entire 3 years. Everything that actually mattered was harder than that. That should have told me something about how Thailand's priorities are arranged. It also got me a proper visa, which was a relief. Marriage extension, non-O, 400,000 baht sat in a Thai bank account, or 40,000 a month coming in. I did the 400,000 in the bank, because my Canada pension plan doesn't start for years yet, and at that point I had no income at all. 400,000 baht is about 15,500 Canadian, parked untouchable, sitting in a Krung Thai account doing nothing. So let's do the ledger because I said I'd track it and I will. 118,000 in, 16 for the truck, 400,000 baht locked up for immigration, so 15 and a half. About 12 on rent and living for the first year and a half because I wasn't exactly frugal. Sinsad was 300,000 baht out and 300,000 baht back. So that's a wash, except the gold, which stayed with Ploy, and the wedding itself, which cost about 90,000 baht. 3.5 grand for the food and the tent and the monks and the sound system somebody's cousin provided. Call it $71,000 still sitting there in the summer after we married. Comfortable, not rich. Enough for a man of 53 with no pension for another decade to be careful with. Then it rained. Rained the way it rains up there in September. 4 days without stopping. The road out to Bandung under 6 inches of brown water, and the rice fields turned to lakes. The old house handled it the way it always had. It's on pillars, that's the whole point. But the water sat around the base for a fortnight, and when it went down the bottom of the pillars and the concrete pad and the lower block wall were in a bad way. Rot in 2 of the posts. The pad cracked and lifted. A retired school teacher's pension in Thailand is about 7,000 baht a month, by the way. $270. That's what he had to fix it with. Ploy told me about it and then said, immediately, before I'd opened my mouth, "No." She said, "We don't ask you." She said, "My brother and me will find it." She has no brother. I checked that later. She meant the family generally, and what she meant in practice was she'd have taken a loan against her salary at 18% from an outfit in Udon that advertises on a laminated sign. I said absolutely not. I insisted. I want that word in the record. Insisted. She said no 3 times, and I kept going until she stopped saying it, which in that house is not agreement. That's just somebody deciding you can't be talked to. 180,000 baht. 7,200 Canadian. New posts, the pad relayed, the block wall rebuilt higher, and while we were at it, a proper tiled bathroom because the old one was a squat pan behind a curtain, and her mother's knees are worse than mine. And it felt, I've said this before and I'll keep saying it, it felt like medicine. I stood in that yard with a wheelbarrow in my ruined hands and I was useful. 53 years old and useful. The sister turned up around then. Nid, 4 years younger than Ploy, and her husband Somchai. They were at the house constantly through the rebuild, which made sense. Family helps. Except Nid worked and Somchai didn't, and after about the 3rd week, I noticed he'd never once picked up a shovel, and he'd taken to sitting in the good chair, the one with the cushion, the one her father sat in. I said nothing. Obviously, I said nothing. 26 years of not complaining, meeting a culture where you don't cause someone to lose face, and the 2 of them shook hands and agreed I should keep my mouth shut for the next 2 years. That November, driving back from the village, Ploy said the thing. She said, "Murray, we pay 8,000 every month for a house that is not ours." She said, "My father is old." She said, "There is land out past the school. 2 rai. That's about 3/4 of an acre in real money. Out past the school on the Bandung Road, flat as a table, a mango tree in one corner, and a drainage ditch along the front, belonging to a family who'd moved to Rayong and wanted rid of it. 900,000 baht, 36,000 Canadian, and that's where I found out about the law. I want to be fair to Ploy here because she told me. She told me in the truck before we'd even gone to look at it. She said, "Murray, you know Farang cannot buy land in Thailand. Set it flat like the weather." And I said, "Yeah, no, for sure. I'd heard something about that. And I want you to hear how much attention I was actually paying, which was none, because I was busy looking at a mango tree. So we went to a lawyer in Udon, office above a shop on Prayak Silpacom Road, glass door with gold lettering, a fish tank and reception with 3 fish in it, air conditioning going full blast. Man in his 50s, decent English, framed certificates on the wall, and a secretary who brought in cold water in little glasses on a tray. He laid it out in about 10 minutes. Foreigners cannot own land. Not through a wife, not through a friend, not at all. There's a company structure some people use where you set up a Thai limited company with Thai shareholders holding 51%. And he said, and I remember this clearly, he said that this is common and it is also not really legal and it can be unwound. He didn't recommend it. Good on him for that. What he recommended was this. The land goes in Ploy's name. Full stop. It's hers. Legally, completely, forever. And then we register a thing on the title, the Shenote, the big official land document with the seal on it, called a usufruct. City kept kin. He said the words a couple of times, and I didn't retain either of them. What it does is it gives me the legal right to possess and use that land for a fixed term. 30 years, which was the maximum, so out to 2053. Registered at the land office, written on the back of the deed itself, in the government record. Not a private agreement between me and my wife. On the deed. He said, and this is the bit I really should have written down, he said, with this on the title, the land cannot be sold clear or mortgaged without dealing with your right. 10 minutes to explain, 20 minutes to sign, and here's my confession, the second big one of this story. I didn't read it. I did not read one word of it. There was a Thai version and an English version, and I signed both, and I put my copy in a plastic document wallet with my truck registration and my old Visa stamps. And I did not open that wallet again for 2.5 years. Because why would I? The man had certificates on the wall. The fish tank was clean. He talked me out of the company structure, which is exactly the thing that made me trust him. Same as Ploy costing herself a sale on the Vigo. Somebody turns down money and my whole brain shuts off. 26 years on the rigs. You don't ask twice. I signed that usufruct exactly the way I signed Kevin's investment in 2019. Same posture, same muscle, a man across a table who seemed straight. Then we built 1.4 million baht, 56,000 Canadian, near enough. Local builder, a fella called Out who'd done half the newer houses in the district, and we did it in stages the way everyone does up there. Pay for the foundations, they pour. You pay for the block, they build. You pay for the roof. Cash every time. No mortgage, no bank, nothing on paper except a sheet of A4 with the stages written on it in biro. 18 months. And I have to tell you, that was the best time of my life. I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not being sentimental about it now that it's over. Those 18 months were better than anything Canada ever gave me. I was on site every single day. Every day. Out there by 7 with a flask of coffee, the mist still sitting on the paddy fields. The loudspeaker on the pole down the road announcing something about a funeral or a vaccination day. Concrete mixer going, 6 guys and about 4 of them barefoot, which took me a while to get past. Rebar spacing arguments in about 11 words of Thai and a lot of pointing. I caught a mistake in the ring beam in the second month. Actual mistake, actual money. Out looked at it, looked at me, laughed and fixed it. And after that, they started asking me things. A 53-year-old Canadian with hands that don't close, standing in a rice field in Isan, being asked his opinion about steel. I hadn't been asked my opinion about anything since 2018. We moved in the following spring. 3 bedrooms, big covered terrace, a proper Western kitchen for me, and a Thai kitchen outside for Ploy, because nobody in that family was going to fry pla raw indoors, and honestly, they were right. Spirit house out front, sited by a monk from the Wat, red Fanta on it. Let's do the ledger. I said I'd track it. 118,000 in. Truck 16, 400,000 baht locked in the bank for immigration, 15.5. Living costs, wedding, the fridge and the cement, and all the small stuff. Call it 17 across the whole period. Her parents' flood repairs, 7.2. Land, 36. House, 56. You can add that up as well as I can. It comes out over the top. I sold nothing because I had nothing left to sell. So what actually happened is I ran the numbers down to about $7,000 in a Bangkok bank account, plus the 400,000 baht sitting untouchable for the visa. That was it. 54 years old, no CPP for another decade, and about 9 grand between me and nothing, living in a house I'd paid $111,000 for and did not own a single brick of. I knew that. I want to be clear that I knew it. I just thought it was fine because I had a wife and a father-in-law who'd interrogated me about death and a piece of paper in a plastic wallet. Her mother moved in about 2 months after we did. Expected, normal. She's 71, her knees are gone. We'd built the downstairs bedroom with her in mind. I had no problem with that, and I still don't. Then Nid, Nid's the younger sister, and she came for a fortnight in the August and stayed. Then Somchai came for her. And Somchai, I said before I'd noticed he never picked up a shovel. In our house, he never picked up anything. He sat on the terrace in the mornings drinking Nescafe out of a glass, and he had opinions about which chair was his. And one of them was the one I'd bought in Udon and carried in myself. 9 months. 9 months, I said nothing. You want to know exactly how that works? On a rig, if something's wrong, you fix it or you shut up. Those are the 2 doors. There's no third door where you sit down and talk about your feelings with the crew. And I couldn't fix it, because it wasn't mine to fix, because it was her family in her house on her land. So I shut up. And she, Krengjai, you don't cause someone discomfort. You don't put a problem into the room where it can be seen. She shut up too. 2 people, opposite sides of the planet, arriving at the exact same silence for completely different reasons. She started taking her phone calls outside, down by the mango tree 20 minutes at a time, back turned, started sleeping badly. Lost weight she didn't have to lose. There was a night in the January I came out at 2 in the morning for a glass of water, and she was sitting on the terrace in the dark. Not on her phone, not doing anything, just sitting. I asked what was wrong. She said nothing. I asked again, twice, which for me is a lot, and she said her mother's blood pressure. I took that. I took the blood pressure answer, and I went back to bed. I think about that a lot. That's the moment. Not the lawyer's office, not the money. That was the moment where a direct question was sitting right there on the table in front of me, and I picked up the easy answer instead, because the easy answer let me go back to sleep. Songkran came round in the April. Water everywhere, kids with buckets on the roadside, the whole village soaked and cheerful, powder on everybody's faces. Ploy's family was arriving over the next few days from Sakan Nakhon and Konkain. I drove into Udon that afternoon for beer, ice, and a new pump for the water tank. I was gone about 5 hours. I got back about 6. The light was going. That orange, dusty light you get up there in April before the rains. And the road out past the school was still wet from the water fights. Kids sat on the verge with their buckets empty, powder dried white on their faces. Somebody's speakers going 200 meters away. Dogs asleep in the middle of the road, as usual. And I went round them, as usual. Gate was open. Truck bed full of ice that was already going. 2 crates of Leo, and the water pump in a box on the passenger seat. The house was quiet, which was the first thing. Songkran, family arriving, and no noise at all. I went up the steps with the pump under my arm, and there were 3 black bin bags on the terrace by the door. Big ones, the 90-liter ones from the shop in the village, tied at the neck. And there was a new lock on the door. Brass. Bright, unweathered brass on a door I'd hung myself. I stood there and I put my key in it anyway, because that's what you do. You put the key in, even though you can see, and it went in about 1/3 of an inch and stopped. I want to tell you what I felt, and the honest answer is nothing. Nothing at all. I've been on a rig when a line let go, and there's this thing that happens where the noise goes away, and you just start looking at what's in front of you. That, exactly that. So I looked at what was in front of me, 3 bags. I opened the top one because I wanted to know, and it was my clothes. Folded. That's the detail I can't get past even now. 2 years on, she'd folded them. My work shirts, the Fort Mac Legion sweatshirt I'd had since 2009, my good trousers. Folded, then put in a bin bag. Somebody who's throwing you out doesn't fold. The kitchen light was on inside. I could hear the fan. I knocked and nobody came, and I knocked again and said her name, not shouting, and after about 2 minutes it was Nid who came to the window. Not the door, the window, she said, in English, which she barely speaks. Ploy not want you here. I said, is she all right? And Nid shut the window. Now the other thing, and I checked this standing right there on the step in the dark, because some part of my brain was still working even if the rest of it had gone offline. My passport, it was in my bag, in the truck, because it goes with me when I drive anywhere in case of a checkpoint. Blue book for the Fortuner in the glove box, bank card in my wallet. If that passport had been in the drawer in that bedroom, this is a completely different story, and it's a much worse one. I want any man watching this to sit with that for a second. My entire legal existence in that country was one habit away from being behind a lock I couldn't open. So I stood in my own driveway. On land I'd paid 900,000 baht for and did not own. In front of a house I'd paid 1.4 million baht for and could not enter. And I did the arithmetic because I'm a man who does arithmetic when he's frightened. $111,000. My mother's house in Lethbridge, the one she and Dad bought in 1979, every stick of it, converted into concrete and steel and tile in a rice field 11,000 kilometers away on the wrong side of a brass lock. I drove to Udon, don't remember the drive, got a room at a place near the lake, 1,200 baht a night, and I lay on that bed with the lights off and the aircon rattling, and I did not move for the best part of 2 days. I want to be honest about what was in my head because it wasn't grief for her. That came later. What it was for 2 days was Kevin, because it was the same. That's all I could think. It's the same shape. You trust the man on the other end of the chain. You don't ask twice. And then one day the phone stops getting answered and there's a new lock and you're the idiot standing outside. 54 years old and I'd done it twice. Twice. Same man, same mistake, different hemisphere. I ate 2 toasted sandwiches from the 7-Eleven across the road in 2 days. Didn't drink, funnily enough. I thought I would. I just lay there. I didn't phone Wade. Obviously, I didn't phone Wade. Day 4 in the morning, my phone went. Not line, an actual phone call, which up there means it's serious or it's a scam. It was bank. 22 by then, 3rd year engineering at Con Kane, and I'd probably had 4 proper conversations with the lad in 3 years because his English was careful like his mother's, and he was shy of me. He called me Uncle Murray, which he'd never done before. He was ashamed. You could hear it. He kept apologizing before he'd said anything worth apologizing for. And then he told me, Somchai, the brother-in-law, the one in my chair, the one who never picked up a shovel, Somchai was in for about 2 million baht, 80,000 Canadian, informal lenders. Not a bank, not paperwork, the sort of arrangement that starts at 3% a month and ends with men coming to the house. Some of it was gambling, and some of it was a pickup truck business in Sakan that went the way these things go. And for 8 months, bank said. 8 months. They'd been at ploy to get my name off the land, because you can't mortgage land that's got a usufruct registered on it. Not properly. The land is hers and she could sell it or borrow against it in theory, but any lender who looked at that channel would see my right sitting on the back of it, running to 2053, and would want to know what happened to the farang. It made the land nearly useless as collateral. I was the reason the family couldn't dig Somchai out. And Ploy had said no. Bank said it flat in that careful English. My mother say no. Every time she say no. 8 months of her mother, her sister's husband, aunties, the whole weight of that house telling her that her husband's piece of paper was going to sink the family, and her saying no. Getting thinner. Taking phone calls out by the mango tree with her back turned. Sitting on the terrace at 2 in the morning, not doing anything. And then Songkran, with everyone arriving, everyone in the house, and it went past whatever she could hold. And the way it came out was a locksmith from Bandung and 3 bin bags with my shirts folded in them. Bank said something else, and I want to get it right because it's the sentence that runs this whole thing. He said, she cannot tell you. If she tell you, then you know my aunt's husband is like this, and then everybody know. And my grandfather cannot go to the temple. Face. That's what that is. Her father, 34 years teaching in that district, everybody's dad on that road. And the whole village finding out through the farang that his other daughter's husband had put the family 2 million baht into the hole. That's not embarrassment. That's an old man not being able to sit where he's always sat. So she carried it on her own for 8 months and let me think it was her mother's blood pressure. And I'd asked. That's what I keep coming back to. I asked her twice on the terrace that night in January, which for me is one more time than I have ever asked anybody anything. And she gave me the easy answer, and I took it and went to bed, because taking it was easier than learning enough Thai and enough of that family to ask a 3rd time. I sat on the end of that hotel bed with the phone still in my hand after he'd hung up, and the only thing I could think was the paper. What does the paper actually say? 2.5 years, signed in 20 minutes, never opened it once. I got the plastic wallet out of my bag and I sat there with it on my knees for about 10 minutes before I could make myself undo it. It was 4 pages. 4 pages, Thai on one side, English on the other, and I read the whole thing sitting on the end of a hotel bed at 9:30 at night with the aircon rattling and a motorbike going past outside every 30 seconds. City kept kin, usufruct, registered on the Chinot at the Udon Thani Provincial Land Office. 30 years from the date of registration, right to possess, use, and take the fruits of the land. My name, my passport number, my ugly signature at the bottom in the wrong box. I read it 4 times. Then I couldn't sleep, so I read it again about 2 in the morning, and I still didn't trust it because paper had lied to me before. So I was at the land office when it opened. Concrete building, ceiling fans, plastic chairs bolted together in rows, a number machine, and about 40 people already there because everybody in Izan is at the government office by 8:30. I took a ticket, 61. They were on 19, 3 hours. I sat there 3 hours with my document wallet on my knees next to an old lady with a chicken in a rice sack. And I want you to know that's the single most frightened I have been in my entire life, including the time a stand-up pipe came down 40 feet from me in 2007. Because everything came down to whether a man in an air-conditioned office above a shop had actually done the thing he said he'd do, or whether he'd taken my money and printed me 4 nice pages. They called 61. I gave the clerk the deed number and my passport, and she went away for about 8 minutes and came back with the file. She turned the Chinot over on the counter and put her finger on the back of it. There it was, registered, stamped, dated, entered in the book. City kept kin, Murray Kalinowski, to the year 2596 in the Thai calendar, which is 2053 in mine. I asked her, through a young fellow waiting behind me, who had good English and was very kind about it, whether the land could be sold or mortgaged with that on it, and she gave me a look like I'd asked whether water was wet and said no, not without dealing with your right. I went outside and sat on a bench in a car park and cried like a child for about 10 minutes while people walked past me and pretended not to notice, which is a very Thai kindness. And I want to be completely honest with you about this, because if I dress it up, the whole story's worthless. That was luck. That was not judgment. I signed that paper exactly as carelessly as I signed Kevin's investment in 2019. The only difference between the two outcomes is that one man across the desk was honest and one wasn't, and I could not tell them apart. I still couldn't. That's not a system. That's weather. So, what I did next. This is the bit people always want, and it's going to disappoint you. I didn't go back and kick the door in. I didn't call the police, and I'll tell you why. Because a Farang bringing police to a Thai family's house over a domestic matter in a village that size, that's a thing you cannot undo. Her father would have had to live with that for the rest of his life. And I'd have won the argument and burned the road down. What I did was paperwork. I got 3 certified copies of the Chinot with the usufruct endorsement. 400 baht or something, nothing. Then I drove to Udon and found a proper firm, an actual Bangkok outfit with a branch office, not a man above a shop, and paid 9,000 baht, $350, for a lawyer to read every single document I'd signed in 3 years. Marriage registration, the land transfer, the usufruct, the builder's agreement, all of it. 2 days. She came back and said the usufruct was solid and correctly registered, that I had a right of possession nobody could remove without a court, and a very good reason, and that the house, the actual structure, was a separate question I could have strengthened years ago with a construction permit in my own name, which I hadn't done, and which cost me nothing to learn now except the knowledge that I'd been sloppy. Then I opened a new account at a different bank, moved my remaining money, about $7,000, which was everything I had that wasn't locked up for immigration, into it with a different card and a different app, and I told nobody. Not because Ploy's a thief. She isn't. She refused for 8 months when refusing was the hardest thing she's ever done. I did it because families have emergencies, and a man with no boundary is not being kind. He's just being a resource until he runs out. And then I sent her one photograph and one line of text online. The photograph was the certified note with the endorsement on the back. The line said, "I know about Somchai. I'm not going anywhere. He is." She rang me 11 minutes later and she was crying so hard I couldn't understand a word for the first minute. 11 days after the locks changed, she opened the door. Her father drove over from Bandung, 74 years old, and sat on our terrace and had a conversation with Need and Somchai that I was not present for and do not want the details of. They were gone by the weekend. Somchai's debt is still Somchai's debt. The family's helping the way families do, in small amounts over years, and I don't ask, and I don't pay, and that boundary has held. Then Ploy and I had the first honest conversation of our entire marriage, 3 years in, conducted badly in about a language and a half with a translation app on the table between us and both of us starting sentences we couldn't finish. She said she thought I would leave. She said if I knew, I would see her family as the family from the videos, the bad family, and I would go. She said she was trying to protect me and her father at the same time, and there was no way to do both, so she chose the one who would still be alive in 10 years. I told her about Kevin, first person on this earth I ever told. My wife of 3 years sat on a plastic chair in a house I built, and it took me 20 minutes. So, where I am now, July, 2 years on, still married, still in that house, still own absolutely nothing. Ledger final, $118,000 in, about $111,000 gone. I have no title, no equity, and nothing to leave anybody. What I have is a registered right to live on that land until 2053, when I'll be 79, and CPP and OAS starting in a few years, which will be somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 Canadian a month, which up there is a comfortable life. Is that a fair trade? I've decided it is. Some days more than others. I'm studying Thai now, properly with a teacher, 2 hours twice a week, and I am terrible at it. 54-year-old rig hand trying to hear 5 tones. But last month I asked Ploy a difficult question in Thai, badly, and she answered it, and that's worth more than the mango tree. Here's what I'd tell you. Read the paper. Read every word of it, twice, and pay a second lawyer to read it again. 9,000 baht against $111,000. Do that arithmetic. If you build on Thai land, get the usufruct registered on the shanote at the land office. Not a contract in a drawer. On the deed, in the book, with a stamp. And put the construction permit in your own name while you're at it. Keep money she cannot see. Not because she's a thief, because emergencies are real, and you cannot be the answer to all of them. And this last one's the expensive one. Learn enough of the language and enough of the family to ask a real question and understand the real answer. Because when a Thai woman goes quiet on you, she might be robbing you, and she might be standing between you and her whole family with her back against the door. And if you can't ask, you will never, ever know which. I asked twice on that terrace in January. Twice is not enough. 26 years of not asking twice nearly cost me everything. Twice. That was Murray Kalinowski from Fort McMurray, Alberta. We want to be careful about what this story is, because it would be easy to file it as a happy ending, and it isn't quite one. Murray spent roughly 111,000 Canadian dollars and owns nothing at all. What he kept by accident, because a lawyer he never checked on happened to be honest and did the job properly and registered the usufruct on the title exactly as he said he would. But that piece of paper is real, and it's worth understanding. Under Thai law, foreigners cannot own land. Not through a wife, not through a nominee, not through a company structure that somebody in a bar swears is fine. What a foreigner can do is register a usufruct or a long lease on the title deed itself at the land office, a right that exists in the government record and cannot be quietly erased. Thousands of men build houses in this country every year on nothing more than trust and a verbal promise. Murray had trust, a verbal promise, and one registered document. Only the document survived contact with a family emergency. And notice what the emergency actually was. No bar, no scam, no fake sick buffalo. A brother-in-law with 2 million baht of debt a family under unbearable pressure, and a woman who said no for 8 months and then broke under the weight of it in the least graceful way possible. Every person in this story behaved badly at some point, and almost nobody behaved wickedly. If you take one thing from Murray, take this. His real failure wasn't financial. It was that in 3 years of marriage, he never learned to ask a direct question, and she was never able to give a direct answer. And both of them thought their silence was a form of decency. It nearly cost him everything, and it cost her 8 months of carrying something alone that she should never have carried alone at all. Read what you sign, register what matters, and learn enough of your partner's language to ask the third question. Thank you for watching. If this one gave you something to think about, leave a comment and let us know. And there are more stories waiting for you on the channel. This is Thailand.